Hey folks, so I'm not going to do a PowerPoint on this. It's the last chapter. It's fairly short, and the first half of it kind of covers ground that we already covered earlier in the class when we were talking about fieldwork methods. Henry just talks about this late in the book, and so a lot of the chapter we've already sort of touched on the material, and the only thing that I think she introduces in the fieldwork part that we haven't really talked about up until this point is the concept of multi-sited ethnography. And we talked about how to do ethnographic fieldwork. You'll have done ethnographic fieldwork, through your first paper. But that, was focused on a single site. And traditionally, this is what anthropologists have done, is focused on single field sites. And we talked in the last module about transnationalism and sort of flow of people around the world, globalization, tourism, these kind of things where you've got, it's easy for people to move around. People make those global connections either by choice or by compulsion, if they've been pushed out of their home country by economic need, warfare, natural disaster, that kind of thing. So with that greater flow of people around and the emergence of diasporic communities in various parts of the globe, one of the responses that anthropology has made to deal with this is to do what is referred to as multi-sited ethnography, where if you're going to write stories and describe the lives of any group of people these days, it's often the case that you have to do that by encountering them in very different parts of the world. And so you may do part of the research and write part of the research from the standpoint of, say, the home country, but then look at migrant communities and in the diaspora as well, and which not only gets sort of the whole story for one culture, but then it opens up the potential for looking at how the migrant community in the diaspora understands this connection to the homeland and what cultural similarities there are between the two, what cultural differences there are between the diaspora and the homeland, and how things like identity and sense of place are shaped by having these vastly globalized transnational communities. Now, so that's an important thing to understand about the way that anthropology, sort of shifts as we get towards the modern world. And Henry finishes out the chapter by trying to talk a little bit about what is a place of anthropology and what is a place of anthropologists within modern day landscape. And this is something that it's a good question to raise, because I think if people have an idea of what anthropologists do, it's an old time stereotype of you go sit in some foreign land and write books about things that only other anthropologists read. And that is a caricature that comes up very often to criticize the field, particularly when it comes to, we live in a land where, assaults to funding for higher education are common. Anthropology is one of those things that, the caricature of anthropology is one of the things that often gets held up as a lever for, rationalizing reductions to arts and humanities. And that's not really a fair characterization of the field, because most anthropologists don't work in a university setting. you'll have a handful of professors. What they really do is train people to go to work in a wide range of business fields, and there's actually an entire branch of anthropology that's called applied anthropology or practical anthropology, where people work in the corporate sector and have a really important role to play, because we talked in the last module about globalization and the way that production is no longer done in one place. You have parts of any production process take place various places around the globe and then are brought together in one place for assembly. Developing the business connections and establishing those links in a globalized marketplace creates a really important role for anthropologists, because as corporations are going out and trying to establish these links, they need to understand other countries, other sort of mass culture in those other places, and business culture within those other places. So you have a lot of anthropologists work as consultants or work within companies to try to help basically the businessmen understand the cultural nuance of working in foreign sectors. Now, you also have anthropologists who specialize in corporate culture, and so any organization that values its people is going to try to figure out what problems exist within the company, both for workplace morale and productivity and efficiency and all these things. And there are a lot of anthropologists who specialize in doing essentially ethnographic work with employees within a company to identify issues, to identify viewpoints, to identify key points of culture within that one company, and then provide that information to the company's administration so they can help keep people working well and happily. You also get a lot of anthropologists who work with non-governmental organizations to identify to identify problems that could be cultural, political, economic, environmental, justice-related things, and represent those problems to both local, federal, state, federal government, or their equivalent in other countries, and to be public advocates for people who either don't have the connections or the written skills and whatever dominant language is out there to adequately present for themselves. They basically become brokers and advocates for people who need help but don't have the skill set to acquire that on their own. And so you get anthropologists working in that non-governmental organization sector as well on a lot of these issues. And so that's situations following, say, indigenous people in the Amazon rainforest. You get a lot of anthropologists working there, but also when it comes to things like implementing changes in culture that help combat climate change, pollution, whatever social ill, it's often beneficial. A lot of NGOs and companies find to have both these scientists who can help sort of identify the physical dimensions of any of those problems, but then also employ anthropologists who figure out not only how would implementing change affect subject populations that are tied to this issue, but also if you have to make a change, how do you work with local communities to implement that change? Because the most places, just having outsiders come in and say, you need to do this now is not going to work. And so figuring out how to frame narratives to be intelligible and respected by local groups is something anthropologists are really good at, and that's why they get included in a lot of research teams. And also, figuring out the ramifications of economic, technological, cultural change that's being imposed from the outside, and helping to mitigate the adverse effects of that are all things that anthropologists can bring to the table. And so you'll find people working in contexts for companies that on the face of it don't look like they should have much call for anthropologists, but they do. And so it's actually, despite its sort of negative caricature that it gets within the press, because it's seen as, sort of a bunch of egg-headed people going off and, sort of sitting in the woods and talking with people that are not part of the, sort of major capitalist business-oriented world. Very few people actually, that's the way that they connect with anthropology. Most of the field is in this much more applied sector. And even those folks who come through anthropology programs that don't stay in the field often leave with the ability to do things like, write clearly, to talk to people, to synthesize data. These are all, what a lot of people, a lot of businessmen refer to as soft skills that are sorely lacking in a lot of academic departments that focus maybe more on like STEM education or something like that, but don't prioritize that sort of the people skills that come with more formal training in anthropology. And I wish we had the opportunity to offer deeper classes in this, like maybe an advanced cultural anthropology class. We don't have that, but I hope you've seen in Hendry the breadth and depth of the kinds of research that a lot of anthropologists do. And that's one of the things that she really likes to set up her chapters in. She'll give you a description of basic concepts and then say, okay, well, there are these 3 books out there that are on the subject that people have done some really fascinating and complex work on, that she's sort of leading you. If you want to go read more about them, you can look those up, and that gives you, a window on how vastly different kinds of things anthropologists can get involved in. Now, right, so from Hendry, which we're now basically done with, gone through the gist of it, we're going to move on to Philippe Bourgeois' A Search of Respect, which this is going to be our long form ethnography. So as we get reading about it, and I'm going to have like a separate video after this that'll start introducing the book and sort of, talk about what I hope you get out of it. As Bourgeois starts talking about different aspects of Spanish Harlem in New York, where the book is set, look for some of the things that we've talked about in the first part of this class. See how that manifests in Bourgeois' book, particularly paying attention to things like economics, globalization, transnationalism, migration, identity, and like gender relations, because these are all things that are going to be really important aspects of Bourgeois' work. So keep this short, and Phil, see you next time. Stay safe, stay healthy.